Hey, it's me. I'm Jay. Wolfenstein was a game made by the same people who made Doom, but this game came before that. They previously had a successful game named Commander Keen, a side-scrolling shooter where you play as a guy who shoots stuff. After the success, the dudes up at ID, specifically John Carmack, he made Doom and Quake, he was a genius, were like, games right now are for babies! We need to make something cooler. And boom, out pops this Nazi-killing, gun-slinging, blood-rushing game. It was met with immediate success, selling 250,000 copies in like 3 years, which was good at the time. Like 3 people owned computers. One of the things that made Wolfenstein so successful is that it appeared three-dimensional. You were walking around, you could turn to the left. I was seeing through my character's eyes, and it's performing. Okay, yes, 3D engines did exist at the time, but none of them can compute graphics fast enough to make a playable game. How was Wolfenstein able to do it? Because it isn't 3D. Yes, Wolfenstein is not a 3D game. Then how does it work? It uses something called raycasting. Raycasting, in its very basic application to Wolfenstein and what we're doing today, is casting a vector forward until it hits something or reaches its max distance, which is then used to decide the length of the piece of the wall we're going to draw on the screen to make it appear 3D. It's a little bit more complicated than that, but I'll try and walk you through a lot of the math that goes into it. To program this Raycaster, I'm going to be using Love2D. Love2D is a Lua framework used for making two-dimensional games. It's just something I'm familiar with, to be real. You can use anything. Let's get started. Let's start with the map. For the map, I want it to be defined using a table of tables. Each element in our outermost table will contain a wall, per se, containing the 4 X and Y values needed to draw it. In Love, you must load each engine inside the program before you can draw it to the screen. We'll save the loaded images in another table called Textures. To show our map on the screen, we'll iterate through each wall inside our list and draw our line with the corresponding coordinates for that wall. Here's what it looks like. Next, I'm going to talk about some convenience functions that'll really help us for this project. The first one is obvious, it's just going to be the distance between 2 points. The next function is one that finds the intersection between 2 lines. This will come in handy when we cast our rays. The last function is the closest point on a line in relation to a point. This function is good for when we apply our textures along with our player collision. Speaking of player collision, let's program our player. We can start off by making a table named player that includes an X, Y, and a rotation key. We can program the player's movement by changing its X and Y coordinate by the sine and cosine of the player's rotation respectively whenever W, A, S, or D is pressed. To program our mouse to rotate our player, we can first capture the mouse to the application, meaning that the application will record the movement of our mouse. Then we can reset its position to the center of our application every frame, and then get its distance from the middle of our window. We'll rotate our player based on the distance of our mouse's X position from the center. In order to collide with walls, we'll iterate through each line in our map. If the closest point to the player on a wall is less than the radius of our player's collision shape, then we know we're collided with a wall. To fix our player's position, we first have to find if the player's coordinate is bigger than our point of collision. If it is, we'll set the player's coordinate to the point of collision plus the radius of the player's collision. If it's smaller, we'll set the player's coordinate to the point of collision minus the radius of the player's collision shape. We repeat this process for both X and Y coordinates. I've temporarily rendered both the map and the player on the screen just to show you the mechanisms of the player. Here's how he moves around. Or she. Or them. We're inclusive here. Finally, we can begin raycasting. This is where our intersection function will come in handy. To raycast, we need some more information, such as the field of view of our camera and how many rays we want to cast. The more rays, the less pixelated or low quality our 3D image will look. We'll define these parameters inside of our player table. We start casting our rays from the very left of the player's view, or the player's rotation minus half of our field of view, and we cast all the way to the right side of our view, or the player's rotation plus half of our field of view. The angles between each of our rays will be congruent because we rotate each ray by the field of view divided by our ray count. Since we're repeating this action for the count of our rays, we'll always end at the right side of our screen. Say for example, our ray count was 8. We divide the region from the left side of our view to the right side in 8 rays, each with congruent angles. With our rays casted, we iterate through all the walls in our map to see if any of them collide with our ray. If they do, then we get the wall with the closest collision point to our player. We store the collision's x and y coordinates, the ray's rotation, and the coordinates used to make up the line we collided with. This, along with the information of our player, is all the information we need to draw this three-dimensionally. If the distance of our ray is bigger, then the segment we draw on our screen will be smaller, and vice versa, since something appears smaller when it's farther away from you. Mathematically, we get the height of our segment by dividing some really large value, I chose our screen height, by the distance from the collision point of the ray in our player's position. We can use the player's rotation and the rotation of the ray to decide what side of the screen it goes on by subtracting them. Next, we multiply this by the width of our application to stretch the 3D image across our entire screen. Then add the width of our application divided by 2 to center our image in the middle. Here's what it looks like with a ray count of 50. You can see each individual section we draw. And here's what it looks like with a ray count of 200. The image becomes much more crisp and a lot less pixely. With this, we get a strange result. It almost looks like a fisheye lens. Why? Imagine the player is perpendicular with the wall. The rays on the side of the player have to travel farther, meaning that the lines distort and appear farther on the sides of our screen, even though we want the wall to stay the same height throughout our entire view. We can fix this pretty easily. If you multiply the ray's distance by the cosine of the difference between our player's rotation and our ray's rotation, it produces a convincing enough result. This works because as the angle of our player and the angle of our ray grow farther apart, the cosine of their differences will increase parabolically. The curve of our fisheyes is also parabolic, so it cancels out that curve we see. Here's what it looks like now. We're almost done. Now let's add textures. We know that our ray's collision point lies somewhere on our line. If we were to divide the distance between the first coordinate of our line and the coordinate of our ray's collision by the length of the line, or the distance between the 2 points of our line, we get a value between 0 and 1. That tells us how far we are on the line. Let's save this value as segment. If we multiply our segment by the width of our texture, then we can use this to decide which part of our texture we want to draw for our sector on the screen. In Love, images are scaled multiplicatively, meaning that with the scale of 1, our image is at its original width in pixels. This is a problem. Walls need to look the same no matter what the size of our texture is. We can get the inverse of our texture's width and then multiply that by any value to set its scale in pixels. For example, if we wanted our image to be 100 pixels wide, we multiply the inverse by 100. To draw this sector correctly, we'll define a function named sector. Love has a feature called a scissor box. If we set our scissor box, then only everything inside of the box will draw. This means we can draw only parts of our texture at once. Scale the texture correctly, align it with our scissor, and draw. The last thing we're going to do is add a ceiling and a floor, some shading based on how far the line is, and we're done. Here's what it looks like with some textures I found. As of now, our Raycaster is complete. Thank you so much for watching this video. I really hope you enjoyed it. If content like this interests you, please let me know. This project was really fun to work on, and I would love to explain other programming projects I've made. Thank you. I'm gonna burp in the middle of this. By the distance from our collision point of the ray in our player, I knew it was gonna happen.